France, Russia, Tokugawa Japan, the Qing dynasty, the Ottomans, the Mughals. Long ago, the six nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when absolutism attacked. Only the rulers, master of their nations, could fight off the urge to have complete control. But when the world needed them most, they became tyrants. Hundreds of years passed, and my friends and I discovered the Enlightenment, and although it has a lot of revolutionary ideas, it has to influence a lot of people before it's ready to save anyone. But I believe that the Enlightenment can save the world. Where are we, guys? Well, we're in our first stop, Tokugawa, Japan. This period of Japanese history had the most complex feudal system ever developed. It was created because of Tokugawa Ieyasu, the united Japan after a period of warring between the powerful daimyo. He divided Japan into 250 regions, each with its own farms. The Japanese adapted their agricultural practices into the environment and developed an agricultural system that corresponds closely to the ideals of sustainability. But what made them so successful? Well, their advancements in medicine, use of vaccination and midwives, and innovation of gunpowder certainly contributed to their strength. The Japanese had Confucianism as their main ideology, which emphasized the importance of education and the widespread establishment of schools of science and technology. Their economy was also very powerful and consisted of feudalism and limited foreign trade with Western Europe. The aforementioned feudalism had a rigid social structure, which consisted of the emperor at the top, then the shogun, then the daimyo, then the samurai, then the peasants, and at the very bottom, the merchants and artisans. Overall, this empire was able to thrive due to its political structure. Now, let's continue on to our journey to find the Enlightenment. Ah yes, we have arrived in China during the Qing dynasty. This dynasty was ruled by the emperor and the Chinese bureaucracy, which was formed by the infamous civil service exam and Confucian ideals. However, the bureaucracy became corrupt during Qiang Long's reign, resulting in a failed White Lotus rebellion. Qiang Long additionally made many military conquests, most notably in western China. As the population grew, they experienced a land shortage, which they tried to fix by setting laws that limited the number of land people could own. But this dynasty was not like other dynasties, since it had a lot of innovations, including the kanji dictionary and colored glazes for pottery. However, most modern science and technology was neglected. Their culture was also very unique, since it was based on the Manchu who took over. They wanted their culture to be dominant, and did so by forcing the men to wear Manchu hairstyles, such as braided pigtails. Marriage between Manchurians and the Chinese was banned to maintain ethnic distinctiveness and Manchu dominance. Emperor Kanji opened ports for foreign trade and sold tea, silk, and porcelain products to England and India, and was selling them for silver since they imported few goods. Man, I do love this Eastern culture, but let's go further west. Wow, where have we arrived now? Why, it's the Mughal Empire. This empire was located in India, but covered a lot more territory, including half of the Indian subcontinent, which made it one of the largest Indian empires in history. This empire was run by an absolute emperor, most famous of which included Babur and Akbar. They mainly focused on the expansion of the empire through military conquests. These military conquests were successful due to the improved artillery they had received from their battles with the Ottomans. Under the rule of Akbar, there was religious tolerance, and both Muslims and Hindus lived together. Akbar was actually very progressive for an emperor, since he prohibited child marriage and tried to prohibit sati, a ritual where widows killed themselves by jumping on funeral pyres for their husbands. This vast absolutist empire was supported by its strong economy, which was mostly based on overseas trade. Commerce was carried out by mostly Arab traders, since Indian traders did not care for the travel on the Indian Ocean. Goods traded included textiles, tropical foods, spices, and precious stones. All the factors allowed for the Mughal Empire to become one of the most important empires during the pre-modern period. After a lengthy journey, we have finally arrived at the Ottoman Empire. This empire is located in present-day Turkey and was one of the most powerful empires in the world. The geography of the Ottoman Empire allowed access to the Mediterranean Sea and the Silk Road, and by extension, Asia. They were ruled by a sultan, who had centralized authority. The Ottoman military and naval powers were also very strong since they had very good leaders, cavalries, janissaries, and advanced technology. Their most influential innovation was the implementation of gunpowder in their military, which gave them a huge advantage in battle. Their government was highly influenced by Islam and was run by Sharia law, which was a system of Islamic laws that dealt with all aspects of life, including criminal justice, marital laws, and issues of inheritance. In fact, most things were influenced by Islam, including the architecture and arts. Christianity and Judaism were allowed in the empire, but most polytheistic religions were not. Moving on from religion, the Ottomans had a strong economy that made it the longest-lasting and richest empire in world history. They earned their wealth mostly through conquest and trade, since they had controlled the gold and slave trade in Africa. To finance the economy, the Ottomans relied on taxing the peasants. Speaking of the social class was built around a warrior aristocracy that soon began to compete with the positions in the bureaucracy with the ulama. Women also played a social and political role, and encouraged wives encouraged their sons to become heirs to the throne, creating harem politics. Overall, the Ottoman Empire's use of conquest and absolutism allowed it to be the longest and richest empire in the world. Whoa, it's really cold here. Where are we? Why, we're in Russia under Tsar Peter the Great and Tsarina Catherine the Great. Now, let's set the stage of what it's like to live in Russia. Firstly, Russia was an autocratic empire ruled by the Tsar or Emperor. One of their main achievements was expanding the empire. Peter the Great conquered the Baltic Sea, and Catherine conquered territories along the Black Sea. The territory they had gained had lots of different environments, such as warm water ports in St. Petersburg, the Ural Mountains that served as a protective barrier, and the Black Sea, which had abundant precipitation, warm winters, and humid summers. They also improved China through their many innovations, such as the improvement of technology in naval and military areas, and setting the precedent of smallpox inoculations. Peter the Great got these ideas from visiting Europe, since he believed that the westernization of Russia would lead to its success. Additionally, Catherine the Great set up schools for young girls, and Peter the Great created the Peterhof Palace, which is a comparable palace to the Palace of Versailles. But you might be wondering, how did the non-royalty of Russia live their everyday lives? Well, the country was mostly agrarian and ran by feudalism. Nobles had complete control over the serfs and treated them very harshly. However, the nobility were also under the watchful eye of the government, as to make sure that they did not take over the country. Most Russians were Russian Orthodox, a branch of the Eastern Orthodox that split off as a way for the Tsars to have more power over the empire. Peter even removed the patriarchy and replaced it with a Holy Synod, which directly responded to him for religious affairs. Overall, Russia was an absolutist government that sought out to become the largest empire and more Western European. But I think we're almost there to the Enlightenment. Let's keep going. Wow, we're finally here, in France during the rule of King Louis XIV. He is an absolute monarch that rules with France with his slogan, "One king, one law, one faith." He has his minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert at his right-hand side to help him make decisions. For instance, Colbert implemented many economic policies, such as increasing taxation, creating the 5 farms, and implementing mercantilism. Another important innovation from this time period in France was the establishment of the Royal Academy of Science, which provided the necessary grounds for performing scientific research studies. Additionally, France had the highest population of the European continent, since it avoided entering the huge 30 Years' War. The architecture was also a huge part of French culture, since the Palace at Versailles was built during this period to keep the nobles entertained. Lastly, King Louis XIV's laws enforced a social hierarchy consisting of the estates, including the king at the very top, then the clergy, then the nobility, and then finally the peasants. And this was maintained throughout his reign by enforcing certain fashion styles and codes for each class. Overall, France was an absolute monarchy that successfully centralized their power and allowed them to become one of the world powers of the pre-modern and modern era. Now, we have finally made it to Western Europe. Let's begin the Enlightenment.